Hi again, I'm Emil, founder and CEO of Tomorrow Bio. Of course, on this channel, we talk a lot about the technology of cryopreservation, the medical factors in cryopreservation, and of course also about the research of cryopreservation. But an additional factor that is quite important to determine the overall quality of a cryopreservation is legal factors, and more precisely, the logistical limitations that might follow from these legal factors. So this is a short summary. What are the most important legal factors, legal limitations in a standard cryopreservation case? So when you start from the beginning and then go towards the end of cryopreservation, when someone is finally placed in long-term cryostasis, the initial point would be under what circumstances is it allowed to pronounce someone legally dead? In most countries, this is either one or two things or a combination of both. So there are certain countries where you can pronounce someone based on circulatory arrest, meaning when the heart stops, the person can be pronounced. There are other countries where, in addition to the heart having stopped, you need additional factors to be allowed to pronounce. Germany, for example, is one of those. You would, in addition to that, need to see what is called secure or safe signs of death. There's a long list of those, some of which can be seen pretty short after death, some of which can usually at least be seen a bit longer after death. So in our case, in Germany here, we would need to wait until one of these secure signs of death is being seen by a doctor. Usually that can be done within a few minutes after circulatory arrest. In other countries, it's also possible that to allow for quicker logistics after, you would need an EKG or some other mechanistic measurement to determine that this person has died and that there was no foul play, basically. Foul play in general is a big factor in pronouncement procedure. When a doctor pronounces someone, they need to fill a so-called death certificate. Basically, where the doctor writes down, depends again a bit on country, but writes down what is the logical progression of that disease. Let's say someone has been diagnosed with cancer and there was a metastasis of that cancer, and so on, until that underlying disease led to the patient's death. If that is there, this logic chain from a disease to death, then the doctor would check on this is a natural death. On the other hand, if there is no logical chain, or if of course the patient has died in an accident, or if there was some kind of third-party involvement or potential third-party involvement in that death, then the doctor might check this is an unnatural death, which leads then to significant delays in the cryopreservation because usually the police gets involved and so on and so on. So this is always the first step. How is pronouncement being done? And of course, for a cryopreservation case, best if pronouncement is being done as quick as possible with the least possible amount of delay after circulatory arrest. But we can, wherever we are, we can only always get involved once legal death has been pronounced. That's step number one. Step number two would be now the body would be handed over to us. Usually there is no specific regulation in what is required for us to receive the body. There are certain countries where it might be necessary that you're registered as, for example, a funeral company, but usually either we partner with them. Some countries we also registered as a funeral company ourselves. So that usually there's no problem with that. The next step would now be taking possession of that body and then transporting the body to Switzerland for long-term storage. Sometimes there can be mandatory delays of when that transport is allowed to be done. For example, there are some countries that have a 24-hour rule. For example, Italy does have that. I said in the beginning that if pronouncement of death is done with an ECG, then in that case, this duration that needs to be, basically this is wait time, can be reduced in certain countries. So of course, we would always then talk to the doctors and ask them that we would like to and need to transport the body as quick as possible to another country. And then if at all possible, everything should be done so to allow that without any delay. Of course, in some cases, or in most cases, at that point, we have already done the cryoprotection. So the body has been perfused with cryoprotective agent, is then cooled down to dry ice temperature, which is about -80 degrees Celsius, at which temperature you can, it's not ideal, but you can wait a bit. So even if there's some amount of delay until all the documents are there to transport to another country, because that is what's required from a legal perspective before the actual transport across borders can be done. There need to be certain documents that are usually issued by either the municipality or some other government body, depends again on the country. At that time, you already have done the cool down and now you can transport once you have these documents in hand. All of our contracts, of course, state that we're supposed to receive these documents as quick as possible. And since our SST teams are usually on site during those times, we do everything in our power to get these documents as quick as possible. And of course, interface with the family and so on to not have any undue delay. during that procedure. Now, after transport, there's technically some legal regulation of under which circumstances and which kind of factors the car needs to have and the packaging in quotation marks needs to have to be allowed to transport bodies. But that is usually relatively easy to fix, and all of our cars, our ambulances are of course equipped with all necessary equipment and necessary what is required to allow that. After that, there's pretty much no limitations from a legal standpoint anymore. Now you bring the body to Switzerland, cool down the body to cryogenic temperatures, and then put them into one of the cryostasis doors, at which point then, well, you wait it out until arrival might be possible at some point. There will be, of course, new legal challenges at that point probably, but usually legal regulations follows technology. So once technology is possible, the legal framework then adapts to that new technology, and usually there will be ways, or usually there are ways that can be found how to make that work, even though that is pretty much speculation, because that might be many, many decades, if not centuries in the future. But there, I'm cautiously optimistic that that will work in the future. So these are kind of the legal limitations. If you want to discuss with us what legal limitations or legal regulations and legal requirements might be necessary in your country, as always, feel free to reach out. Talk to us. We're more than happy to discuss this in person and give any information that we have. Talk to you soon, and feel free to subscribe if you want to learn more about these topics. And as always reach out.